Skeptics of the Bible have sometimes alleged that Jonah is a false prophet. God called him to go to the Gentile city of Nineveh. The prophetic message he was to take to the Ninevites was that they were so evil that God was going to wipe them out. Upon hearing this message, the Ninevites repented in sackcloth and ashes, to use the King James idiom. After they repented, God did not wipe them out. Was this a false prophecy? Not when we realize that the main purpose of prophecy is that the hearers should repent or perish. And the whole point of the book of Jonah is how graceful and merciful God is. Isn't that the gospel? Isn't that the whole point of the entire Bible when it is read in context? We deserve God's wrath, but we don't get what we deserve if we repent. Not getting what we deserve is a good thing, not a bad thing. That is prophecy, the genre of prophecy. A similar in some ways, but also very different genre in other ways, is apocalyptic. Apocalyptic literature unveils what God is doing in heaven, offstage or behind the scenes. It reveals to us in the here and now that are suffering persecution and perhaps even martyrdom because of our faith that God is still in control. It reveals to us in the here and now, if we're suffering persecution and perhaps even martyrdom because of our faith, it reveals to us that God is still in control. The wrong shall fail, the right and the right prevail. In the end, the wrong shall fail, the right prevail in the end of the world as we know it, when God brings in his plan to final consummation. The chief characteristic of the apocalyptic genre seems to be how metaphorical it is. The imagery is extreme and rapid fire. The sun, S-U-N, falls to the earth, and every creature in heaven and earth dies as the world is baptized in blood and fire. That kind of language is used throughout apocalyptic literature. The most famous example of apocalyptic in the Bible is the last book of the Bible, namely the book of Revelation. But this is not the only example in the Bible of the apocalyptic genre, nor is apocalyptic restricted to the Bible alone, though in the Bible alone, in my opinion, is apocalyptic literature also prophetic literature. Prophetic in both the foretelling and in the forthtelling senses. There is a lot of debate on how literal to interpret the apocalyptic genre. And I hate to invoke the L word here, but I will. I myself tend for the least literal, most symbolic possible. But most conservative Christians would probably go for the most literal and least symbolic possible. By possible, I mean warranted by the context. So again, we see that context really determines everything in hermeneutics. Moving along to the next genre, we come to wisdom literature. And again, this is not a genre which is very well known outside of the Bible or the ancient, scholars of the ancient world. In Egypt, for example, they had wisdom literature, so an Egyptologist would be familiar with wisdom literature, but it's not really a contemporary genre. I suppose you could call it proto-philosophy. Often it is a collection of proverbs or maxims or concise general observations of how life usually works. As you can imagine, the book of Proverbs in the Bible is the most famous example of wisdom literature in the Bible. Note that Proverbs with a lowercase p are not absolute laws of what has to happen in every case. Another common form of wisdom literature is, I think, a reflection on death. We don't really find a lot of that kind of wisdom literature in the Bible itself, though. And then the book of Job, another piece of wisdom literature that reflects on the suffering of the righteous. And finally, Ecclesiastes is wisdom literature dealing with, I think, the meaninglessness of life without God. Um, it's not perhaps very clear to me what Ecclesiastes is about, but I think that's what it's trying to say. That life without God is, in fact, meaningless and not worth living. And one part of apocryphal work, which, by the way, talks about natural theology or classical apologetics, is in the genre of wisdom literature, and that's the book of Ecclesiasticus. It's in Roman Catholic Bibles, though not in Protestant Bibles. It's part of the Apocrypha, and that would be another example of wisdom literature from the ancient world. Now, wisdom literature is about just that. It's about wisdom. Wisdom as opposed to mere knowledge. Wisdom is practical knowledge, knowledge applied to life. Wisdom in wisdom literature is encouraged in contrast to foolishness, which is discouraged. So a wise man will have certain behaviors. He won't mess around with the neighbor's wife, for example. But the foolish man would have many girlfriends on the side, and so on, that kind of thing. So wisdom in contrast to foolishness. Wisdom literature in the Bible is best summed up by the proverb from the book of Proverbs, which says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom." The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. That is the best way, perhaps, to summarize what wisdom literature is all about. Okay, so that is the first several genres we find in the Bible, and we'll continue looking at genres in subsequent videos. And the next one is ancient biography, and I think after that is the letter. So two left to go: ancient biography and letter. Thank you all for viewing. Shalom. Have a great day.